Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine from SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the 6 affordable apartments being offered at the Essex and Melrose. So the purpose of this session is to give you a little bit of background information on the available apartments, but also to cover the application, eligibility, and lottery process and what to expect after the lottery. So if you have any questions during this session, you can either type them into the Zoom chat, or you can unmute yourself, because when you came into the meeting, you were muted just to minimize any outside noise. So I'll be asking throughout the presentation if you have any questions. And this is a live session. It's being recorded because it's going to be posted to SEB Housing's YouTube channel after tonight. So it'll be available for anyone who wasn't able to join but wanted to attend. So just for some background information on who we are, so SEB Housing, we are an offsite affordable housing consulting group. So we're not the on-site management team, but we've been hired by the developer to market the affordable units, conduct this information session, collect and review applications to determine an applicant's eligibility for the affordable housing program, and then we'll be the ones running the lottery when the time comes. So in the initial phases, we're your main point of contact rather than the management team over at the Essex. But then further along in the process, the Essex management staff or leasing office will take over as your main point of contact. But there's a few steps in the process. The first is applying for the lottery, and you have to qualify for the affordable housing program to be entered into the lottery. That's just based off of what you self-report. So when you're filling out your application, you're self-reporting what your income is. We're not asking for your pay stubs or verifying information at this point. That will come later on in the process if you're one of the top households on the waiting list to move forward. But during that initial step, we are your main point of contact, SEB Housing. We can answer any questions you have on the affordable housing program. We'll review your application, and we'll run the lottery. If you are found to be eligible for the lottery, you'll get an email from us to that effect, and I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. The second step in the process is if your waiting list placement, your position on the waiting list is high enough after we do the lottery, you'll be put in contact with the leasing office or the management team for their lease eligibility screening. So that's separate from the program screenings that SEB Housing does. That lease screening could include a credit check, a rental history check, background checks, that sort of thing that you might be familiar with from renting elsewhere. And you'll reserve one of the affordable apartments once you have been approved by the leasing office. And then the third step in the process is actually your lease eligibility. So you're referred back to SEB Housing after you've been found lease eligible, and you'll complete a program certification with SEB Housing. And that's the point in the process where you'll have to submit pay stubs, verification of income and assets, that sort of thing. And so once that screening is complete with SEB Housing, you'll be put in touch with the leasing office again to sign your lease. So a few steps in the process. We don't require, like I said, pay stubs or anything up front to try to keep the process as simple as possible to actually get into the lottery. And then if you're one of the top households, that's when you're asked to do some more legwork by sending in your verifying information. So if you haven't already, you're invited to go to our website, sebhousing.com, and there is a page specific to this opportunity. So if you click on Affordable Housing Opportunities and select I want to rent, and then select the Essex Melrose, you'll be taken to a page specific to the property, which has a downloadable version of a PDF of an application, an information packet, as well as the Jotform link here, the online application link that you can see on your screen. And we encourage you to complete your application online. It is the quickest way to apply and ensure that your application is received right away. Once you've submitted your online application, you'll receive an automatic sort of bounce back confirmation email confirming that your application was received. If for any reason the online application isn't an option for you, you can download that PDF and you can complete it and send it in via email. You can send in a paper application, or you can request a paper application from SCB Housing if you'd rather do it that way. And on the first page of the paper application, it makes it clear that you can email it to us, you can fax it to us, you can send it by regular mail. We also have a Dropbox, a secure Dropbox at our office in Needham if you're ever in that area. So whichever one of those options works best for you, we just encourage you to use that online application if you can. And again, it's fairly brief. You don't have to submit supporting documentation at this point. You're just self-reporting as best you can what your income and assets are. And the application deadline is July 27th, so you still got about a month at 2 o'clock. So the reason it's specific and says 2 p.m. is because the online application will be down after 2 p.m. So it will not work after 2 p.m. So you want to make sure your application is in before then if you intend to apply for this lottery. And you don't need to be a resident of Melrose to apply. There are going to be some affordable units that will have local preference for residents of Melrose, or people who work full-time in Melrose, or who have children who attend Melrose Public Schools. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but it definitely shouldn't dissuade you from applying if you don't live or have local preference in Melrose, because we don't know how many people will apply that live already in the city, and again, only some units have that preference. We have been told that leases should be available immediately after all of the applicant screening, so the units are either available now or they will be very soon. A little bit more about those. So there is a website, essexmelrose.com. For the affordable units, there's 5 one-bedroom, one-bathroom units. The rent for the one bedrooms, this is a little unique to this lottery, are going to either be $1,900 or $2,000. 2 of them are going to be $1,900. 3 of them will be $2,000. And I think the difference is the higher floor will be the $2,000 units, and the lower floors will be the $1,900 units. There's also a 3-bedroom unit. There's no 2 bedrooms at this property, but there's a 3-bedroom unit, and the rent for that will be $2,709. So the affordable rents are not set according to an applicant's income or financial circumstances. So what I mean by that is the rents are not going to change based on your income. It's not like a subsidized program where if you have a Section 8 voucher, your rent is only 30% of your income. For this housing program, the rents use a formula that is based off of the federal HUD, Housing and Urban Development's area median income, and in this case, it's for the Boston Melrose area. The rents could change once a year. That typically occurs around or because of HUD's area median income change each spring. And any time there's a change in your rent, it can never be during the middle of a lease term. So if you signed a lease for, August 1st or September 1st of this year, your rent would be the same for at least 12 months. And you would always have advanced written notice of any change. Since we know there'll be more interested and eligible applicants than we have available units, there's only 6 affordable units, we need to do this lottery process, and only households who qualify for the affordable housing program will be able to get into the lottery. And we'll talk about the parameters for qualifying for the affordable housing program in just a minute, but the first eligibility criteria that comes to mind is just that households need to have an income, a total family income, total household income at or below 80% of the area median income. And those amounts I'll show you in just a minute, but they're all over the materials for this opportunity as well. So the apartments themselves, there's in-unit washer dryer, stainless steel appliances. It's close to green spaces like the Middlesex Fells reservation, and has close access to Route 93 and Route 1. There's pets permitted. It does have the fees for both cats and dogs. There is a free parking space included with the 3-bedroom unit, but there isn't on-site parking for the one-bedroom units at all. We've been told that there is available parking, either street parking or a pay garage that you'd be able to use if you needed to do that. So there's some options in the area, but not that come with the affordable apartments for the one bedrooms. And then tenants are going to pay utilities as well. In terms of the affordable housing program, I mentioned there's some eligibility criteria, the first being you must qualify for the program based off of the incomes that are listed here. So I'll talk more about these amounts in just a minute, but again, the first qualifying parameter is that your household needs to have an income at or below the amounts on your screen. So if you're a one-person household, your total household income for the year would need to be $96,000 or less, because that's the current area median income, or 80% of area median income in the Boston area, or Melrose. So if you're a two-person household or a three-person household, those amounts go up from there, as you can see. So if you're a three-person household, your total household income would need to be at or below $123,400. And that's your gross income, which I'll talk more about in just a few minutes. The second item to keep in mind for eligibility purposes is that household priority is going to be given based off of household composition. What I mean by that is, we have one-bedroom units and three-bedroom units. If you're a three-person household, but you're a couple that shares a bedroom and then you have one child, you're going to be considered a type 2 household, unless there's some sort of disability that your household requires an extra bedroom. So you can apply for the three-bedroom unit, but the larger type 3 households are going to be placed ahead of you on a three-bedroom waiting list. A type 3 household is, households who have 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, and then there's some three-person households that qualify as a type 3 household as well. The application spells all of that out. So does the information packet on page 7. So you'll know what household type you are as you're filling out the application. You're going to indicate that. So just keep that in mind. For the one-bedroom units, there is no difference in eligibility. So you could be a one-person household, a two-person household. If you want to rent a one-bedroom, it doesn't matter which household size you are. You're going to have the same priority on that waiting list. And then the third eligibility criteria is that you can't own a home when you're applying, or at program certification, I should say. So if you own a home right now, it has to be sold prior to when SCB Housing is looking at your finances later on in a couple steps from now, after the lottery. And then the fourth eligibility criteria, this doesn't come up very often at all, but households can't have financial interest in the development and can't be considered a related party. So what that means is if you're working for the developer or the management company, you may not be eligible for the lottery. And then I'll come back to this slide in just a minute when I'm talking about minimum income amounts. But although when you're filling out your application for the lottery, you don't need to submit your income or asset information, I still want to give you a heads up as to how SCB Housing is going to calculate your total household income. So to circle back to the first eligibility criteria, the income and assets of your household, since these are affordable units, they're going to be made available at prices lower than identical or very similar units in the building. So there's only going to be only households that are going to be able to apply are going to be those that income qualify for the affordable housing program. So income for this program is counted as a projection of your income over the next 12 months. So that includes for all household members. So if you have 4 people in your household, it's going to be all 4 household members' income that is added together. And the only exceptions to that are minors. So maybe you have a 16-year-old or something like that working in your household, they're earning a wage. We're not going to count their income, their wage income. And also for full-time students, so maybe you have a 20-year-old college student that's living with you and they're working and earning a wage, it's only the first $480 of their total income that we would count towards your total household income when we're looking at your eligibility. Those are the only two exceptions, though. Any other income coming into the household is going to be counted toward your total household income. And it is gross income that we have to count. So the amount you make before taxes, unfortunately. So that's what the program dictates. So most of us are not taking home, the amount that's shown on our pay stubs, but that is the amount that we need to count before, like I said, taxes, medical insurance, that sort of thing. And then how we calculate income isn't one size fits all. So everyone's income circumstances are unique. Some people are working and getting a weekly or biweekly salary that's very consistent throughout the year. But anyone who's, working seasonally or per diem or is self-employed, we may need to ask for additional information from you in order to gauge what your income is going to be for the next 12 months. So in general, any income that you have been making, we're going to assume that you're going to continue making it going forward, unless we have some sort of definitive documentation showing that you're not going to be earning that wage anymore, for example. So if we're looking at your tax returns from 2025 and it's showing that you had 2 jobs, but you've only submitted pay stubs for one of them, we're going to be asking what happened to that previous employer, for example. So when you're filling out your application, just make sure that you are completing it to the best of your ability, meaning you're listing every income, every asset that you have on that, so we can minimize the back and forth after the fact if we are doing your program certification after the lottery. I mentioned that I mentioned minimum income. So there's no minimum incomes for the Affordable Housing Program. However, most teams, including the management team at the Essex, wants to be sure that all tenants, regardless of whether or not they're renting a market rate unit or an affordable unit, they want to make sure that everyone can afford their rent. So the management company has set a minimum household income equivalent to 2.5 times the monthly rent. So that's what these amounts are here. These are approximate amounts because it is going to be up to the management team at the Essex as to whether or not your household qualifies for their lease criteria. So while the income limits that are listed up here are set in stone by the program, there's a little bit of wiggle room here for the minimum income amounts. So in general, if you're a one-person household and you're looking to rent a 1-bedroom unit, your income would need to be, your total household income would need to be between $57,000 a year and $96,000 a year. But if you were a little bit under $57,000, for example, the leasing office might say, okay, let's take a look at your assets. You have a decent amount of liquid assets that you might be able to access to pay for the rent. So we will approve your household. So that's why I say approximate when the minimum incomes are listed there. The minimum income amounts can be disregarded by anyone who has a mobile housing voucher, like a Section 8 voucher, because they won't apply to your household, since you're going to have a voucher agency who's administering your voucher, and they're going to be paying for a portion of your rent. So those minimum income amounts don't need to be met by your household. But applicants without a voucher, like I said, would need to be between those amounts that you see there. There is no asset limit for, and that's on this other screen here, so there's no asset limit for rental opportunities. So you could be retired, you could have a significant amount of money in assets. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to apply for an affordable rental. Although there's no asset limit for households applying for this lottery, we do still need to collect your asset info. So we're going to be asking for, bank statements, that sort of thing. We'll look into, any assets really. So 401k values, your Venmo, PayPal, even stuff like that. So don't be alarmed when we're asking for that after the lottery, if even though there is no limit on assets. And the reason we do that is because any income that you have from assets, so if any of your assets are generating income, a portion of that interest needs to be counted towards your total household income. And there's a lot more information about that too in the information packet. All right, so I've covered the eligibility criteria for the housing program and the lottery. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, let me know. This next portion here, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about lottery eligibility and how the lottery itself will be run when the time comes for that. All right, so again, if you're interested in this opportunity, we encourage you to get your application in to get the process started. I also want to mention too, if you're interested in both a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, for example, you can apply for both. You just want to indicate that on your application. So if you submit your lottery application, we're going to review it and contact you if any information appears incorrect, and you'll be able to resubmit. With the online application, it can get a little confusing because you're going to get that email from us that says your lottery application was received, but that doesn't mean we've reviewed it because it's going to be reviewed, within a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, and you'll get a more personalized email from SCB Housing once it's actually been reviewed. You also too want to just make sure, if you get an ineligible notice, so if you get a notice from us saying, sorry, you're over income or you're under income, but you don't think that's accurate, please make sure to contact us and let us know. Sometimes people have, typos on their online application and it may have disqualified you mistakenly. So if you're found eligible for the lottery, you're going to be sent that more personalized email with your lottery application number. And it's going to be in the form of a series of numbers. So if you were the very first person to submit an application and be approved for this lottery, your number would be A.001. That's not a ranking of any sort at this point. It's just the number that you want to keep in mind. So your name is not going to be called during the lottery. It's going to be that number that you are looking for, or listening for, I should say. And that email is also going to confirm whether or not you reported that you're a resident of Melrose, or someone who has children in Melrose Public Schools, or someone who works full-time within the city of Melrose. Applicants who indicated that they live or work full-time, like I said, are going to be considered local preference households, and you would have to indicate that on your application. Because some of the units of the Essex will have that priority, it just means that local preference households would have priority over non-local preference households of the same household size. So if you complete that incorrectly and you say you have local preference when you're not able to confirm that after the fact, that would be an issue and you'd lose your placement on the waiting list. So just make sure, like I said, that you're filling that out accurately. That email is also going to confirm your bedroom size that you applied for. So make sure that that's correct. And there's also going to be a link to a documentation requirements guide. And that's going to give you a little bit more information about what information we're going to be requesting from you after the lottery if you're one of the top households on the waiting list. So how many pay stubs, how many bank statements, that sort of thing. It will give you more information about what to prepare to send in if you're called forward after the lottery is run. But the lottery itself is going to be on August 11th at 6 p.m. Same sort of thing same sort of setup that we have right now in terms of it being a 6 p.m. Zoom call. I will be screen sharing, so you'll be able to see the lottery drawing in real time. And keep in mind that you don't have to be present for the lottery to move forward in the process. The results of the lottery, the actual sorted waiting list, will be sent to everyone who qualified for this lottery. To conduct the lottery, we're going to be using a website called random.org. It allows for instantaneous results. You'll be able to see them on your screen. And basically, the lottery numbers will all be randomized on the screen. They'll be scrambled into a random order, and that is the drawing, rather than pulling each number individually. This makes it a little more random and really instantaneous. every lottery number will be picked or drawn. Sometimes you think of lotteries and you think, okay, there's only 6 affordable units, so they're going to pick 6 lottery numbers, but that's not how this will work because everyone is going to have a position on the waiting list. Because the purpose of the lottery is to establish an order of priority on the waiting list. So in general, it's more beneficial for your number to be called early in the lottery, but it may not be the deciding factor as to whether or not you're moving forward in the process because, again, I need to sort the results onto the waiting list by priority. So if a type 2 household is drawn first in the lottery, but they've applied for a type 3 apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment, then they'll still be behind all type 3 households on the 3-bedroom waiting list. And households might be entered into the lottery and be found ineligible to lease a unit, or they may drop off because they ultimately decide not to rent an apartment. So all that is to say, if your number is drawn later in the lottery, you shouldn't assume that you won't be able to rent one of the affordable units. You may still have the opportunity to do that. And if you're tuning in during the lottery, it can get a little confusing because, like I said, it's not, you're going to see your where your lottery number was drawn, but I haven't sorted the results onto the waiting list by priority yet. So you know a lot more when I send the email with the sorted waiting list to you, which I should say I do usually that evening, so it's not much of a wait. You will know the results later on that day. So after the lottery, like I said, you'll get an email from me that has the waiting list attached to it. And at that point, you'll be able to see where your number was drawn and where you are on each waiting list. You'll find your lottery application number and you'll have a better idea as to whether or not you're moving forward to the next step in the process, which is to apply for a lease and complete your lease screening with the leasing office. So you'll connect with the management team over at the Essex and, you'll submit the information that they need to do your lease screening. And like I said, if you're found to be lease eligible, you can reserve one of the affordable apartments. If for any reason the first person on the waiting list doesn't follow through with that process, we will move on to the next person on the waiting list and so forth. So it can take a little bit of time to lease the affordable unit. So if you're further down the waiting list, don't be surprised if you're contacted. If you're lease approved, that's the point in the process where having a position near the top of the waiting list is particularly beneficial because if you are the first person on the 1-bedroom waiting list, for example, you have the first choice at reserving an affordable 1-bedroom unit. That's true even if the person behind you on the waiting list, or I should say ahead of you on the waiting list, or I guess behind you on the waiting list, happens to complete their lease eligibility first, because the management team has to honor the order of the waiting list. So the first person will have the first opportunity, second person will have the second opportunity, and it goes on from there. Once you've reserved an affordable unit, you've been lease screened, you've now reserved an apartment, the leasing office is going to notify SEB Housing so we can contact you to coordinate your program screening, which again is when you'd have to submit pay stubs, asset tax documentation, and all of that. So hopefully by that point, you've had a chance to kind of gather or have everything you need to send in to us. And, it's a lot of information to send in. So if you don't provide everything on your first attempt to SEB Housing, that's fine. You'll just get an incomplete notice from us and you'll have another chance to complete your application. So again, no worries if you're not able to get everything on the first try. Sometimes, you think you have everything submitted and then we have some questions on a pay stub or a bank statement or whatever it is. So just know that it can take a little while to get a completed application. But then once you're approved by SEB Housing, we let the leasing office know and you're able to sign a lease for that unit that you have reserved. So question here, will the lottery be held publicly or will we just receive the results? Both. So the live lottery will be digital, so it'll be like this, in a Zoom call, but it will be screen shared and you'll be able to see it happen. So it's a public lottery. And so once you're leased and you've signed a lease, you're moving in, you're done with screenings until your recertification. So if you sign a lease, for example, for September 1st, around this time or probably a little bit earlier next year, the leasing office will be asking for your updated finances. So just be prepared for that. If you are leasing any affordable unit, you would be asked to renew your lease and do a screening at that point. If your income has increased and is now above 80% of the area median income, that's fine. Because households remain eligible for the affordable housing apartment at the affordable housing price, as long as the household income doesn't exceed 140% of the current year, so next year's AMI. So to give you an idea of what that might mean for your household, so a household of 2 would qualify for this lottery with an income at or below $109,700. That same family, according to today's area median income for the Melrose, Boston area, would be able to make up to $153,580 at the time of their recertification next year in order to remain eligible to rent at the affordable price. So the program gives you a little bit of wiggle room there to be able to, get a raise and not worry about needing to vacate an affordable apartment. So that kind of covers everything I wanted to get through from the information packet. But if you have questions, please let me know. And if you're watching this after the fact and you have questions, please feel free to email info@scbhousing.com. That's the quickest way to get in touch with us by email, but we also have our phone number here as well, the 617 number. And we look forward to getting your application. If you have questions on the online application, or if you have questions on any of the information that you've read about this property, we encourage you to reach out. Any questions before I let you go?
No, thank you.
Great. Question here, do you know if the ABLE attainable savings accounts are included in assets? I've heard of those in passing before, and I believe so. So you would just, like I mentioned, there's no asset limit. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue to, because you wouldn't be disqualified for the program if you have even a decent amount of money in that account. But we probably will want to see if you're one of the households that's being asked to submit your asset and income information. It probably is something that we would want to take a look at.
Thank you, because I know the Housing Authority requires it as well, but doesn't count it.
Yeah, it's probably the same thing.
Okay.
Similar in our, recertifications and other things. All right, and again, any questions after the fact, please let us know. Yep, are you able to share how many applicants have applied? Yes, I just looked before this call, and there's about 120 applications right now. I know it sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of people that drop off waiting lists after the fact, especially an online application. It's just so easy that there's a lot of people filling out, every application and maybe not following through in the end. So to give you some perspective, sometimes, the leasing office and SCB Housing need to screen about 5 times as many people to fill affordable units. So if there's 6 units here, we might be screening at least 40 people to get them filled. So, but yeah, it's a popular one because of the area and all of that. But yeah, about a month left, so we're expecting a little more than that to come into. And yeah, any other questions, please let us know. Info@scbhousing.com is the easiest way to get in touch with us. And I appreciate your attendance and interest. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
You too.